Hey everybody, Bob Knakal, Chairman and CEO of BKREA, coming to you from the Knakal Map Room. I sell buildings in New York City and have for 40 years. And I recently was on CNBC with my buddy Brian Sullivan, and I said that New York was entering into what will be the biggest sell-off in the history of New York City. Well, that's a pretty bold statement. And I've gotten a lot of emails, a lot of DMs and texts asking me to explain. So I thought I'd do a little video and explain to you why I think that's the case. We've studied the market for a long time. And if you look at the Manhattan market south of 96th Street, there's 27,649 investment properties. Of that stock of properties, the average turnover rate over the last 40 years has been 2.6% of that stock. And very interestingly, it was 2.6% at the end of the 80s, 2.6% at the end of the 90s, 2.6% at the end of the noughts, and 2.6% in 2020. So if you look at this average being so consistent, we have been through a period where for 6 years, we have had below average turnover. And if we look at this turnover rate, during past recessions, S&L crisis in early 2000s, that turnover got so low it was at 1.6% of the stock. The lowest it ever hit was in 2009 when it hit just 1.2%. The highest we've ever seen with regard to that turnover ratio was 4.3%, which occurred in 2012 as people were rushing to beat that 3.8% capital gains tax increase that was buried in the healthcare law. I believe we are going to enter a period of time with 2 or 3 years of turnover that exceeds 5%. Never been done in the past 40 years. Why do I think that? Well, we have an interesting dynamic in the New York City market today. We have different product sectors are performing differently. The hotel market is on the upswing, and people are seeing values come back and may want to take advantage of that. Retail sector, the same thing. Retail in New York started to get negatively impacted 3 or 4 years before everything else did. Those rents have started to stabilize. People think they've stopped going down. Leasing activity is picking up. Investor demand is back. As investor demand comes back, values are going to go up. People are going to want to take advantage of that. The industrial market in New York, very strong, although it's such a small part of the market, it's probably not going to move the needle, but we may see some trading in that sector. So trading in those sectors will happen for positive reasons because value is going up and there's pent-up demand. We've had so many years of below trend turnover, it's going to pick up. And let's look at the 2 sectors that are really going to drive this unprecedented turnover. First, the multifamily market. Almost every refinance in the multifamily sector today is requiring significant cash in, 25 to 35% in most cases. Why is that happening? Well, that market really started to get hurt negatively during the 2019 rent regulation changes. Those were implemented in June of 2019. It had a negative impact on value right away. Then we got hit with the pandemic. Now we're getting hit with interest rates. If you look at this dynamic, folks generally don't have the fresh capital to put into these buildings to effectuate the cash in refi. So they're selling buildings to raise capital to hold on to the buildings that they want to hold on to. Very, very significant trading is going to happen in that space. Further, let's look at the B and C office sector, and it's important to disaggregate the office sector into the new construction Class A sector, which is doing relatively well. Tenant demand is good. Those buildings are performing well. But the B and C office sector is having a really, really tough time today because there are buildings that were acquired for $700 a foot, $800 a foot that have $400 a foot in debt, and the competing building across the street is selling for $300 a foot or even $200 a foot. It's going to be very, very challenging for those owners with $400 a foot in debt to compete for tenants against somebody that has the cost basis of $200 a foot. And we're already seeing that happening where tenants are asking leasing brokers, what's the cost basis? What's the amount of debt? And this is something where it's going to be extremely challenging for folks to get out of that negative feedback loop that's being created by this dynamic with interest rates being so high and cash in refi being something that's going to be required, and people acquiring buildings at such a low basis, they're going to be able to very, very effectively compete for tenants. So based on this, I believe that within this B and C office building sector, 50% or more of the buildings in that B and C class will be owned by somebody else 3 to 4 years from today. It's going to virtually be impossible for some folks to hold on. And with all the office demand that exists for new supply and the tough challenge demand we see for older stock, it's going to be very, very challenging for folks to rent those buildings. We are approaching about 100 million vacant square feet of office space in New York. Fortunately, our policymakers are talking about and implementing a lot of very new programs to incentivize the conversion of this space into residential. But this office stock is going to fall into 3 very distinct buckets. There will be some buildings that will be renovated, upgraded. They're going to stay office buildings because every office tenant can't pay $150 or $250 a foot in rent. The next bucket is going to be those buildings that will be converted to residential. And with the zoning incentives and the other changes that our policymakers are implementing, we expect that a large stock of these buildings will be converted to residential, which is desperately needed in New York. And then there's a third bucket where values have gotten so low that even when you layer in demolition costs, these buildings are going to be demolished to make way for new construction. So net, what's going to happen? You're going to have folks taking advantage of rising values in sectors that have been depressed for quite a while. At pent-up demand and seeing these enhanced values are going to bring discretionary sellers to the market. But within the multifamily sector and the B and C office sector, you're going to have a lot of folks who are forced to sell, or who are going to have to sell to raise capital to effectuate refinancings for the buildings they want to hold on to. So I really think we're going to see turnover exceed 5%, probably in 2025, maybe in 2026. But this is coming. We're already starting to feel it. There's momentum in the market. And I really believe we're heading into an unbelievably historic time in terms of the transfer of ownership that's going to happen in New York City, unlike anything we've seen in 40 years. I'll check in with you in about a year and we'll see how that's doing, but I really believe it's going to happen.